Survival is a strange thing. When you are fighting for your life, the world narrows down to a single point, a single breath, a single heartbeat. The pain is the only truth that exists. But when the pain stops, when the fever breaks and the sun comes up, the world rushes back in, and usually it brings the war with it. Greta woke up. For a long time, she didn't open her eyes. She just lay there, feeling the coolness of the sheets against her skin. The fire in her arm, that raging, consuming heat that had tried to kill her for 3 days, was gone. In its place was a dull, throbbing ache, the kind of ache that tells you are alive. She took a breath. It didn't rattle in her chest. The air smelled of iodine, boiled cabbage, and damp concrete. It was the smell of the 112th Evacuation Hospital. She looked at her left arm. It was heavy, wrapped in thick layers of clean white American gauze. It looked alien against her dirty gray uniform tunic. She flexed her fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They moved, sluggishly, like they were moving through syrup, but they moved. Captain Brenner hadn't cut it off. He had done exactly what he said he would do. He had gone into the rot, carved it out, and left her whole. She tried to sit up, but her head swam. The fever had burned through her energy reserves like a wildfire. She slumped back against the pillow, exhausted by the simple act of lifting her head. That was when she realized she wasn't alone. And she realized that the silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the silence of a held breath. Greta had been moved. During the delirium of the fever night, while she was screaming for her mother, the orderlies had wheeled her cot out of the emergency triage bay and into the prisoner ward. It was a small, claustrophobic corner of the factory floor, walled off from the rest of the hospital by heavy, hanging canvas tarps. The Americans didn't want their wounded soldiers to have to look at the enemy while they recovered, so they put the Germans in the box. There were 7 cots in the box. 6 of them were occupied by men. A Wehrmacht infantry sergeant with a shattered knee, a Panzer loader with burns covering half his face, a young boy no older than 16 with a stomach wound, an officer with a bandage wrapped around his eyes. They were the wreckage of the German army, defeated, broken, captured. And then there was the 7th cot, Greta. Greta looked around the room. She expected to see camaraderie. After all, they were all in the same boat. They were all Germans. They were all prisoners. They were all survivors. But when she met the eyes of the man in the next bed, she didn't see relief. She saw hate. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the psychology of April 1945. The Third Reich wasn't just losing the war, it was imploding. The propaganda machine in Berlin had spent years telling these men that they were the master race, the invincible soldiers of destiny. They were told that victory was inevitable. And yet, here they were, lying in their own filth in an American factory, eating American charity while their country burned to ash. Defeat tastes bitter. But for a soldier who has sacrificed everything, his health, his friends, his youth, defeat needs a reason. It needs an excuse. They couldn't blame the Americans. The Americans simply beat them with more tanks and more planes. They couldn't blame the Führer, not yet. The indoctrination was still too deep. So they looked for someone else to blame. They looked for the stab in the back, the weakness from within. And there she was. Greta, a 19-year-old girl in a gray uniform. To the American doctors, she was a curiosity, a Luftwaffe Auxiliary, a non-combatant who got caught in the gears of war. But to the men in the prisoner ward, she was a living symbol of their humiliation. Germany had become so desperate, so broken, that they were sending girls to the front lines. Seeing her lying there weak and pale didn't inspire pity in the hardened veterans. It inspired rage. She was the mirror that showed them exactly how far they had fallen. The leader of the ward, if you could call him that, was Corporal Stahl. Stahl was a veteran of the Eastern Front. He had survived the freezing hell of Russia, only to have his femur shattered by a jeep accident near the Rhine. He was in constant pain, he was angry, and he was bored. He watched Greta like a hawk. He watched the nurses bring her extra pillows. He watched Dr. Brenner check her pulse. He watched her survive while his own friends had died in the mud. And he decided that he didn't like it. It started with whispers, small, cruel things muttered in the dark when the American guards were changing shifts. "Look at the princess," Stahl would hiss to the man across the aisle. "We bleed for 5 years and she gets the soft pillow." The other men would chuckle, a dry, humorless sound. Greta heard them. Of course she heard them, but she stayed still, feigning sleep, hoping they would stop. She wanted to scream at them. She wanted to tell them about the walk from the supply depot, about the 3 days without food, about the shrapnel tearing through her arm. She wanted to show them the scar and say, "I bled too. I lost everything too." But she stayed silent. She was 19. She was alone, and she was surrounded by men who looked at her not as a comrade, but as a traitor. The tension broke on the 3rd day. Nurse Hayes entered the ward with the lunch cart. It was standard rations, vegetable soup, and hard bread. Because Greta was still recovering from severe sepsis and blood loss, Dr. Brenner had ordered double rations for her. A simple medical decision. She needed the calories to rebuild the tissue. Hayes placed a bowl on Stahl's tray. Then she placed 2 bowls on Greta's tray. The room went silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the factory generator. Stahl stared at the 2 bowls of soup. To a starving man, food is currency. Food is life. Seeing a girl auxiliary get double what a combat veteran received, it snapped something inside him. "Does she give you special favors, nurse?" Stahl shouted in German. "Is that how she pays for the soup?" Nurse Hayes froze. She didn't speak German, but the tone was unmistakable. It was violent. It was sexual. It was pure venom. Greta shrank back into her pillow, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Tell us, girl," Stahl continued, his voice rising to a shout. "Did you tell the army doctor our positions? Did you sell us out for a bandage?" The other men joined in. The mob mentality took hold. In that moment, they weren't attacking a girl. They were attacking the reason they lost the war. "Traitor! Whore!" the boy with the stomach wound yelled. Greta started to cry, huge, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Nurse Hayes looked from Stahl to Greta. She saw the fear in the girl's eyes. She saw the cruelty in the men's faces. She didn't say a word. She dropped the tray on the floor. Clang. Soup splattered across the concrete. Hayes turned on her heel and stormed out of the ward. The men went quiet. Stahl smirked, leaning back against his pillow. He thought he had won. He thought he had driven the American woman away and put the German girl in her place. He was wrong. Nurse Hayes wasn't running away. She was getting reinforcements. 2 minutes later, the curtain didn't just open, it was ripped aside. Captain Brenner stood in the entrance. He was still wearing his surgical apron. It was stained with old blood and fresh iodine. He had a stethoscope around his neck and a lit cigarette in his hand. He looked massive. He looked like a tank that had decided to park in their living room. Brenner walked into the center of the ward. He didn't look at Greta. He didn't check the charts. He walked straight to Corporal Stahl's bed. Stahl, who was so loud a moment ago, suddenly looked very small. He tried to sit up straight, to assume a posture of military defiance, but it's hard to look tough when your leg is in a pulley and you're wearing a hospital gown.
Brenner leaned down. He took a drag of his cigarette and blew the smoke to the side. "Nurse Hayes tells me you have a lot to say," Brenner said. His voice was dangerously low. "She tells me you have opinions about my patient." Stahl swallowed. He knew enough English to get by. "I was just saying, Captain," Stahl stammered. "Why waste good medicine on her? She is not soldier. We are soldiers. We fight." Brenner looked at him. He looked at the iron cross pinned to Stahl's tunic hanging on the chair. Then he looked at Greta, huddled in her gray blanket, eyes red from crying. Brenner stood up. He turned to face the entire room. He made eye contact with every single man, the sergeant, the panzer loader, the officer with the bandaged eyes. "Listen to me," Brenner said, "and listen good, because I am only going to say this once." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the dust motes seemed to stop moving. "You think because you held a rifle, you're special? You think because you marched into Russia, you deserve better bread than she does?" Brenner shook his head. "Out there," he pointed to the window, to the ruined world outside, "maybe that matters. Out there, you have ranks, you have medals, you have master races and enemies." He stepped closer to the center of the room. "But in here, in my hospital?" He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "There are no generals, there are no privates, there are no Nazis, and there are no allies." Brenner walked back to Stahl's bed. He leaned in close again. "There are only patients," he whispered, "flesh and bone. That is all you are. That is all she is." He pointed at Greta. "She has a wound. I treat the wound. You have a broken leg. I treat the leg. That is the only law in this room. The code of Hippocrates doesn't give a damn about your politics." If I hear one more word, one more whisper, one more insult directed at that girl, I will have the MPs move your cot into the hallway, and you can recover on the cold concrete without a blanket. Do I make myself clear? Stahl looked at the doctor. He looked at the hard, unforgiving eyes of a man who had been cutting people open for 3 years. He knew Brenner wasn't bluffing. "Clear," Stahl whispered. "Good," Brenner said. He turned around. He walked over to Greta's bed. The men watched, holding their breath. Brenner reached out. He adjusted Greta's pillow. He checked the pulse in her wrist. "Eat your soup, Greta. You need the protein." Then, without looking back at the men, he walked out of the ward. The curtain swished shut behind him. The room remained silent for a long, long time. The bullying stopped. Whatever authority Stahl thought he had was shattered. The American captain had leveled the playing field. Over the next week, a strange, uneasy truce formed in the prisoner ward. It wasn't friendship, there was too much history for that, but it was civility. Once the hierarchy of the army was stripped away, once the uniforms were replaced by hospital gowns, they were just 7 broken people trying to heal. As Greta's strength returned, the dynamic in the room shifted again. She was the only one who could walk easily. The men were bedridden with leg injuries or blinded. She started to help. It began with small things. The young boy with the stomach wound dropped his book. Greta picked it up. The officer with the bandaged eyes was thirsty, but his water cup was out of reach. Greta saw him fumbling for it. She walked over. She placed the cool metal cup in his hand. "Danke," he whispered. "Bitter," she replied. Simple words, but in that room they were a bridge. She became the translator. When Nurse Hayes came in to check dressings, Greta would explain what the men needed. "He says the strap is too tight," she would tell Hayes. "He says he feels cold." She became the voice for the very men who had called her a traitor a week before. And slowly, grudgingly, they began to see her not as a symbol of defeat, but as a girl who had survived something they might not have. Nurse Hayes later wrote in a letter to her sister in Ohio, "The German girl, Greta, I think she's the bravest one in here. She walks among them like a ghost. They stripped her of her dignity, but she never lost her manners. I think they are ashamed now. They should be." 3 weeks after she arrived, it was time to go. The news came over the radio. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The Third Reich was history. The hospital went into overdrive. The priority shifted from treating combat wounds to repatriation, processing prisoners, sending them to transit camps, sending them home. Greta was discharged. She was given a set of civilian clothes, a plain dress, likely donated by a relief agency. She folded her torn gray uniform and left it on the cot. She didn't want it anymore. She stood by the door of the ward, holding a small paper bag with her few belongings. She looked at the men. Stahl was asleep. The boy waved at her. She nodded back. A silent farewell to a room full of ghosts. She walked out into the main factory floor. The air was buzzing with activity. Trucks were revving engines outside. Captain Brenner was at the nurses' station, signing paperwork. He looked up and saw her. He walked over. "Are you leaving us?" Brenner asked. "Yes, Captain. The truck is waiting." Brenner looked at her left arm. It was hidden under the sleeve of the dress, but he knew what was underneath. A long, jagged zipper of a scar, a map of the battle they had fought together. "Let me see," he said. She rolled up her sleeve. The wound was fully closed. The skin was pink and puckered but healthy. He pressed his thumb into the muscle. "Make a fist," he ordered. She squeezed. Her grip was weak, but it was there. "Good," Brenner said. "Mix winds. Keep it clean. Massage the scar tissue, or it will get tight." Greta rolled her sleeve down. She looked at the American doctor, the man who had cut her open without anesthesia because he refused to give up on her. She had to know. "Captain?" she asked. Her voice trembled. "Yeah?" "Why?" she asked. "I am the enemy. I am German. You could have let me die. You could have cut it off and saved your medicine for your own men. Why did you fight for me?" Brenner looked at his hands. He looked around the hospital, at the hundreds of broken bodies, American and German alike. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar, a Hershey's ration. He pressed it into her hand. "You're not my enemy, Greta. You're just a kid who got hurt." He looked her in the eye. "Wars are fought by countries. Medicine is for people. Don't forget that." She nodded. She couldn't speak. If she opened her mouth, she would sob. "Go home," Brenner said. "Try to stay out of trouble." She turned and walked out the heavy steel doors. The sunlight was blinding. The fresh air hit her face. It didn't smell of gangrene or iodine. It smelled of spring rain and diesel fuel. A line of U.S. Army trucks was waiting. Soldiers were shouting names, checking lists. Meyer, Schmidt, Weber. She climbed into the back of a truck. She squeezed onto a bench between an old man and a young woman holding a baby. The engine roared into life. The truck lurched forward.